everybody. And how good it is to be back here in Cleve House after 30 years. And my idea was I'd speak for maybe 20 to 30 minutes and then give a chance for some questions and responses. And to honor the next person, maybe to try to finish it around 10 to 11 or 5 to 11. It's already 10:10 to give you a chance to kind of get ready for the next person. So, I don't know what a Fed talk is. In fact, my cynical mind sort of said, is that like fed up or sort of... So, anyway, Fumiko and I have lived in America for the last 25 years. And of course, during those 25 years, we lived mostly in New York, which meant, at least in the early days, we had a lot of opportunity to be with two parents and to hear father and then later father and mother speak directly. So I wanted to start off by sharing with you one encounter that or actually several encounters that kind of culminated with father showing me what he thought about Great Britain. Is that okay? So, yeah, some of you have heard this story before. But anyway, in the latter days, father would have quite lengthy hundacays at East Garden. How many of you here have actually been to East Garden, to the conference center? About half, okay. So, you know, these would be kind of not so structured, and often father would cover several topics. But after a while, I came to feel, maybe I was mistaken at first, but later I definitely wasn't, that whenever father saw me, he would change the topic to talk about the sins of the English. And you know, just as a disclaimer, I am an American citizen, became an American in 2009. So I spent most of those 25 years trying to be American in some way. But anyway, father would either he'd look at me or some angel would tell him, it's time to talk about the sins of the British. And, you know, father needed some kind of focus for those sins, and quite often it was the British Museum. So father had this narrative, which of course is the British Museum is filled with the stolen plunder of the world. And there's some truth in this. You know, I met Fazad this morning, and Fazad is from Iran, there he is. And the great treasure of Persian history is the Cyrus cylinder. It is the equivalent of the Rosetta Stone and carries translations from ancient Persian to other languages of the day. And it's not in Tehran, is it, Fazad? It's sitting there right in the middle of the British Museum, for example. Just happened to arrive there one day, and it was discovered in East London. No, it wasn't actually. And of course, the other famous example is the Elgin marbles, which come from the frieze of the Parthenon. So if you go to Athens these days, there's a new Parthenon museum, and they display all the marbles, and the missing ones, you see the outline, and it says, in London. See, being British, I thought, well, you know, father, the truth is that these things were lying around, probably would have been destroyed if somebody hadn't found them and cared for them. And there's some truth in that as well. And I also thought, why is it that places like Britain have a museum that you, father, can enjoy, and Korea doesn't have any? Because you were too busy fighting each other to care about those kind of things. But then father would go on to say that, you know, and the British, not only are they thieves and murderers, but they're pirates. And this was usually good for another 10 or 15 minutes of talking about the sins of the British pirates. And sometimes it would morph into the British are polar bears, meat-eating carnivores, you know, white, that roam the world and cause destruction. So, you know, I tried to be a loyal son of two parents. But it was really difficult, right? I'd be sitting there fulminating, thinking, you know, father, you're the Messiah, but this is too much. Too much. Anyway, one day, after several times this had happened, Father was really piling it on. And to be honest, I lost my center. So I was just sitting there with a black British storm cloud over my head. Father was going on and on. And I sat there. And then finally, the talk finished. Father walked through the audience. It was over, right? He walked right up to where I was sitting. And he grabbed me. And he said, "You are a pirate." But you're my pirate. So then I felt better. Okay, I don't mind being two parents pirate. So, fast forward to last week. Last week I was in Korea with your mother, and it was really an opportunity, actually just a one-on-one talk really with our translator. And Mother emphasized how much she hopes that Britain, Germany, and France can unite. We have a big region now, right? It's 72 nations. Some of them, 16 or so, we don't even have any formal presence. And about 56 we do. I think Britain is one of the formal presence. But how do you begin? How do you even tackle such an enormous swathe of territory? Obviously you have to find a place to start. And it's not as though there's nothing there. I mean, there's people who've been working hard for a long, long time. So I was trying to listen to think, well, Mother, what do you think are the most important countries, where whatever it is you want to see happen in this huge territory should begin. And so when I heard her say Britain, France, and Germany, in that order, I thought, okay, I'm going to take that as a signal from heaven that these are the countries, and there are many others, of course, where we really have to think about God's priority. In America, when Mother came to the United States right after Father Sunwa, it was a very difficult time. It was honestly a very difficult time. We had an implosion of our American movement and leadership. Some of you remember that. And when Mother came, actually, there was a huge storm, hurricane, on the east coast of America. Many people lost power for days and days and days, 12 days in some places. The city subway was flooded. And Mother wanted to give a speech at the Manhattan Center. And because the public transport was out, and many people hadn't had showers for days and days. I mean, these are small privations compared to most of the world. But it was kind of tough. But we brought ourselves faithfully to the Manhattan Center. And Mother gave a very tough speech, actually. It was really tough. And looking back, I realized that it originated from her own sense of inadequacy, that she felt, as true parents, we lived in this country for almost 40 years, and there's so much that has to be done. We're so far short of where we want to be. So, when you feel that way, I think Mother is also looking for the children who are mature enough to kind of take some of that load, right? But anyway, it didn't work out that well. Honestly, people were traumatized by the feeling of failure and inadequacy and, all those things. On top of which, everyone had made such a big effort to get there, only to be told, you really shouldn't have shown up, kind of thing. So that was 5 years ago. And it took really 5 years to rebuild ourselves to the position where, with confidence, we could hold a program like the one we just finished at Madison Square Garden, with Mother's total belief that you Americans can do it. In fact, she said, I'm not going to give you any directions. I'm not going to give you any Korean leaders to tell you what to do, because I know for sure you know how to win this victory. And we did. We managed to find so many wonderful people from Christian churches and other organizations. We could never fill Madison Square Garden by ourselves, but we knew that if we put the purpose first and invited people to contribute, not simply to participate and spectate, that they would get involved. So just in case you don't know the difference between a commitment and a contribution, because what we're looking for people is a commitment, right? A contribution. You can go back to the breakfast you ate this morning. Okay, so the chicken made a contribution, but the pig made a commitment. So we're looking for commitment in ourselves and in the wider body of faith that God has prepared for this time. I believe, and I know Mother feels exactly the same way, that God has already prepared the people who will build his kingdom. Most of them are not members of our church. Most of them will not be members of our church. That's not the point. God has been raising them, teaching them, educating them for this time. And it's really, really important that we don't miss it. 3 years ago, I was having breakfast with True Mother in Hawaii. There were a few of us there, and she said, I don't really know you very well. And you don't know me very well either. So we should work on that, right? If we're going to be a team, we should at least know more about each other. So what I'd like to know from you today, she said, is why did you join this church? What was it that motivated you to come and work with True Parents? And I was the president, so she said, okay, you go first. So I said, okay, Mother. I'll tell you, the most exciting part of the divine principle for me is the consummation of human history. And I said, when I heard my first lecture, it reminded me of a science fiction story that I read while I was a young person. And Mother said, really? Tell me more. So I said, well, when I was 18, I read this story called The Dark Star. And I took a grapefruit from the table and I put it on the table in front of Mother. So, okay, in this story, a rogue star wanders into the solar system, okay? And it takes the Earth out of its orbit around the sun and starts to drag it into cold space. And it gets cold, and this was the image that stuck in my mind. And this story was, first, of course, it snowed, and then the carbon dioxide snowed on top of the snow, and then the nitrogen snowed on top of the carbon dioxide, and then the oxygen snowed on top of, until finally all the atmosphere had kind of settled as snow. But a few people kept alive by shoveling snow, oxygen snow, onto a fire, and it kind of burned. And it's a story, right? Don't think about the science. So, but imagine the situation, right? The Earth is freezing. The atmosphere is gone. It looks completely hopeless, but scientists calculated that the Earth, in its rotation around this dark star, would come back to a point where it could be recaptured by the sun. So I was showing Mother on the sort of table with oranges and sort of, moving around like this, and she's kind of looking, who is this guy? So anyway, in the story, to have that recapture, what was necessary was for all the survivors to move to one side of the world and detonate some big explosion on the other side. Okay. So, but the point, the analogy that I was making, I'll make to you, made to Mother, was in the same way, human history was captured by Satan. We were in orbit, supposed to be in orbit around God, the first human ancestors, but it was taken out of course. And human history has been dark and cold and frozen. But as you know, in God's providence, there have been some times when there was a chance to restart. Quick divine principle pop quiz here. When was the first time? Noah. It's the time of Noah, right? Don't go into the details of the Noah story, but that was chance 1. When was chance 2? Jesus. It was time of Jesus. And chance 3? It's the time of true parents. I said to Mother, this is the thing that inspired me, that at this time in history, while true parents are alive on the earth, is an opportunity to reset to a new history, the history that was supposed to be. And I said, when I heard the principle, I didn't even know who true parents were. In fact, I thought Father's name was Ramoon. He was some sort of Indian Swami. When in those years, Indian philosophy was very popular. I remember asking my spiritual father, so who is Ramoon? And they're thinking, man, we need to upgrade our lectures. So Mother smiled and she said, well, do you know the name now? I said, yeah, Mother, I've got it. But actually, I think Mother remembered that story, because if you hear her speeches these days, she's always talking about this opportune time in history. And, I think God's calendar, it's not measured in days or weeks or years. I think the unit is the human lifetime in a way. So, we're still in that time of opportunity, in my view. Yes, Father's in the spirit world. Mother is here on earth. We're here. The people who met the Messiah, the true parents, in their lifetime. We're the ones, in a way, who have the inheritance, the legacy. After us, everyone will only have a second-hand observation. But there's something really important about being a primary witness, about being the ones who saw it for themselves. And if you think about the Bible for a moment, many of the stories there would not be there if some of those witnesses hadn't taken time to share them.
That's right.
And some of them are not even of real things that happened. They're dreams, they're visions, they're revelations. So one thing that Fumiko would like to say, I'm not going to invite her up to speak this time, how important it is for each one of us to put down and share our personal encounters with true parents. Whether that's a direct encounter where Father spoke to you or Mother spoke to you, or it might be indirect where you were there and you had an inspiration or a realization. It might even be a dream. Several people told me they had dreams of me coming to Europe, and even before it was announced. So I'm not sure how to feel about that. I think I have to blame them for disturbing the spirit world there. Point is, you probably all have those experiences. But I bet you that most of you actually have not written them down, have not shared them. And I want to encourage you to do that. Number one, when Mother comes to Britain, she will want to hear about those stories. She loves hearing personal testimonies about encounters with God. It's her favorite topic, actually. And number two, we want to preserve those memories for future generations, not just here in Britain, but throughout Europe. And number three, when you do that, I guarantee you will experience personal revival, because it will bring back to you the memories of those direct encounters with God and true parents. David, this morning when he was speaking at Pledge, it was a good speech, wasn't it? Why don't we give him a round of applause? I really felt he was touching on an important point, that we have to kindle the fire of commitment that brought us here in the first place. And he also mentioned, I must disagree on this point, well, is it possible for the second generation to have that kind of experience? And of course, I feel, yes, everybody can and should have the experience of a direct commissioning by God. In fact, again, going back to the scriptures, we see God always commissions people directly. He calls them. I have some favorite stories of commissioning. One is the story of Samuel, who was only 10 or 11 years old. You know that story, right?
David.
Samuel? You know that story? God calling him in the temple 3 times. My personal favorite, honestly speaking, is the story of the calling of Isaiah. And Isaiah was not a young man. He was already married. And he was living in a time which was extremely difficult. This is, after all, the chosen people, but they've blown it. They are not living according to the principles of God. They're not keeping the tradition that God taught them. They're not studying the words that God already gave them. They've forgotten. And they're exiles. So, it's one thing to be preaching the story of the coming kingdom when you haven't had a taste of it, right? When we joined the church, it was all about 1981 or 1984 or some near future date. And there was going to be a worldwide kind of, coming of the nations. But what if you think you've already had that, or you've already had those opportunities, and somehow you couldn't grasp them at the right time, right? I think most of us would say, yeah, there were times, we had big opportunities. I think of the advances we made in the former communist world, or when Father was reaching out to Islam in 1992, and so on. But Isaiah in particular speaks to the situation of a people who feel they've lost their chance and consequently don't feel hope. But this is the wrong feeling to have. In Isaiah 43:18, God says, "Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Forget the past, because I'm beginning something new." It doesn't mean to say the past has no value or that it was all a mistake. No. But just in God's perspective, the important time is right now. The important time is what I'm going to do from this time forward. And I think this should be our philosophy, our thinking point in this moment. It's certainly true Mother's thought. She is consumed with the idea, I have a few years left on the earth. I don't have Father with me anymore. But this is the time I have, and God wants to do a new thing. When God called Isaiah was terrified. He said, "I'm a man with filthy lips, and I live among a people of filthy lips." That term filthy lips, may take a little unpacking. But basically what I understand is you talk about other things than the vision and the promise of God. It doesn't mean to say you're a blasphemer or you swear or you're a bad person, but in a way, your lips have become dirty because they talk about other things than the goal and the priority of God. Because we're a chosen people, called to build the kingdom of God. We really shouldn't have space to be talking about other things. Of course, to talk about the will and the teachings of God is a vast subject. No words are prohibited. But what I find in myself is I'm too ready to think about other things. I'm ready to see the problems, but not the solution that God has already brought. And of course, if you take that perspective, then you only see a forest of problems. You don't see the opportunities. And in that story, God purifies Isaiah with a burning coal. And then asks this question, who shall I send? So think about this. Just before, Isaiah is he's mired in defeat, in recognition of his own inadequacy, his problems, his failures, and not just his, but his whole people have failed and have left God. So in a way, it's an unexpected question. Who shall I send? And he answers, "Send me." So I don't want to speak for a long time this morning, but I feel strongly the Spirit of the Lord asking, who can I send? Who can I send? And I hope you feel, send me. I hope you don't feel, I'm not worthy, I'm too old, I'm too young, I've had my chance, I didn't do it. We all have big weaknesses and shortcomings. I was really moved by David talking about the challenges in his own family. Because at the end of this story that I shared with Mother, she said, "But you haven't said anything about your family." I said, "Well, Mother, I have 5 amazing, wonderful children." And I do. They're aged 30 to 20, but they're all single. And I don't know how to bring them to the point where they want to embrace the marriage, the blessing. And I said to Mother, you might think if you want to choose someone to be your representative, there are plenty of people who've done better than me in this respect, who have all of their children blessed and married. And just lay it out there, do you want to look for someone else? And Mother said, no. She said, first of all, I want you to know that God has a plan for you, for your children, for the grandchildren who are not yet born. God has a plan, and it's a good one. Yes, it's true that it may not be plan A. Maybe it's plan B or plan C, or in my case, plan double Z, or whatever it might be. But the fact is, God has a plan, and God will realize that plan in His time. Mother said also, let's be realistic here. You can't do much about it. You can pray, you can love, you must be unconditional. But there's a limit to what you can do about it. So don't beat yourself up. Don't, allow yourself to be defeated by things that you can't really change yourself. Instead, why don't you focus on the things you can do? And keep praying that God will work on the things that you can't do. You have to allow yourself to truly be in the hands of God. I was really moved by that. And moved because I realized, deep in my heart, I have not often surrendered completely to the will of God. It's a great teaching of the divine principle, honestly speaking, is the portion of responsibility, right? It was one of Father's great discoveries, that even Almighty God cannot complete His providence without people fulfilling their portion of responsibility. And how much do we say that is? 5%, right? But we have to do 100% of it. But here's the thing. Even if you do 100% of your responsibility, it's still only 5%. What we need to do is unlock the 95% that comes from God. Our movement is small. Our numbers are small. Let's face it, it's true. If God were relying on this group of people in this room to restore England, it's not happening. However, God has more than enough people prepared. He has more than enough. God's 95% is more than enough to restore the world, not just Britain, every nation. So I think it's important that, and as that old saying goes, you have to pray as everything depends on God. You have to work as though everything depends on you. And I want to believe that True Mother is onto something. When I was in Berlin, I mentioned, we all shouted against communism. We all preached the wall must go. We made a lot of noise. We waved our placards. We walked in faith. But generally, I think we didn't believe it. Not really. We did it because we loved True Parents. We did it because we wanted to support Yojanin, who was the car president then. And of course, it was exciting to think that this wall was going to go away. But there wasn't really a lot of practical evidence to suggest that it might happen. But it did, actually, just 2 years later. So I invite you that when Mother says a time of transformation is coming, whether that's in 2020 or shortly afterwards, that nations can be restored, that the conflicts which seem impossible to solve can be resolved with the power of God. We're again faced with a choice. We believe it or we doubt it. And I think our response will make a big difference into how long that takes. One thing I've really been impressed by True Mother is how quickly she gets to the point. I don't know if you had the chance to hear her speech at Madison Square Garden. It was very similar to the one she gave at the United States Senate back in December. And really, everything she says has 3 points. Point number 1 is that God has been working in human history for a long time. And usually she only needs 3 or 4 minutes to go all the way from Adam and Eve to the time of Jesus to the time of today. So that's kind of point number 1. Point number 2, God needs you. God always works with people who are alive on the earth right now. Yes, there have been great saints in the past, but they're not here anymore. According to the principle, God can only work and resurrect through the people who are on the earth right now. Point 2, God needs you. Even people that have only met Mother for the first time, she never hesitates to tell them, God needs you. And point 3, and this is my final point, we need true parents. I think we need to remind ourselves of what it is that the principle is really saying. That all of human history started on the wrong note from the wrong beginning. And that everything, all the problems, actually originate from that beginning alienation from God. It's a spiritual problem. And if we forget that and start to think about all these problems one by one, the environmental problem, the religious problem, the political problem, conflict, this and the other. It is overwhelming. And I think that's in a way God's warning. You know, you cannot solve the problem starting from the symptoms. You have to go back to the original cause. And if you do, then we come to the conclusion we do need true parents. We do need the blessing of true parents. We spent some time in America to make an American mission statement. It's really simple. To bring this nation back to God through the teachings and marriage blessing of true parents. It's 15 words. It's not perfect, but there's 3 things in there. The first is the teachings. I think we need to get back to the power of the principle. And we need to find the way to express it to today's world in 2017. You know, that's different from 1955 in Korea. It's a complex, interreligious, international world. People need the right avenue to understand the principle. But the principle is eternal and true. It doesn't ever change. And remember, Father himself struggled to find that principle. You know, even in very simple terms. I mean, how many pages are there in the divine principle? Roughly? 500. Okay. And how long did it take Father to feel he completed that?
9 years.
9 years, right? So 9 years, 500. So rounded out, it's about what? 55 pages a year or something like that. It was really slow going. 1 page a week. Could you carry on with 1 page a week? But of course, it turns out it was nothing like that either. There were months, even years, when there was nothing at all. This is the great self-revelation of Father in Champomakyang, in his autobiography. We all know the story, how he'd have a Korean Bible, a Japanese Bible, an English Bible, and he'd study them and make notes. And sometimes, after doing that for months, he'd realize it's all wrong. I really haven't made a start. He said on sometimes my prayer, my devotion was not enough. And I mean, this is Father who's soaking the floorboards with his tears, but still feeling it's not enough. There were many, even years, where he felt I've made no progress whatsoever. And finally, after almost 9 years, actually on the way back from Japan, he said it was as if God suddenly turned on a movie projector and I began to see the whole of history from God's perspective. And then the secrets that had been hidden for all these years began to flow. I think we're supposed to have that kind of experience ourselves. You know, we all studied the principle, some of us years ago, some of us recently. But I think we need to reapproach it as it really is. The revelation of God to build God's kingdom. And secondly, we need the blessing of true parents. You know, we need to be reconnected to true parents. And in that way we can bring this nation, any nation, back to God. But true parents have already delegated us to the full authority to do both these things. To teach the principle, to give the blessing. It's no longer their responsibility alone. It's ours. I think it's very important to be simple and to be focused on what it is we want to accomplish. I do not have a master strategic plan. I mean, a month ago I was just happily president in the United States thinking probably Mother might want 10 more Madison Square Garden rallies. Didn't have any plan to sort of come and be in a different country. Mother has constantly told me, and this is no lie, I believe in you, I trust you, Europe will benefit from your passion and your vision, and I'm thinking, me? But I'd like to extend that to say, Mother already trusts in us. You may have heard her say, Europe is asleep, Europe is slumbering. Forget that, okay? Forget the past. I'm giving you authority to forget that. In reality, True Mother has enormous expectation and hope and belief. And I told her, Mother, we're going to surprise you with the kind of things we can do. And she said, I'm waiting for that. So, thank you for your warm welcome here. I promised I'd finish with time for a few questions. Really difficult, tough, miserable questions I'm going to give to Fumiko. She's sitting right here. straightforward, easy ones, I'll be happy to take. And then we'll break for the next, well, actually, to cool down a bit, it's kind of hot, isn't it? And break for the next speech. So does would anyone like to ask a question?
Only easy question.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
It's
Luce, that's right. The light bearer from Colombia.
I don't think it's an easy question.
Oh.
That's why I'm asking. Just on the colloquy this morning, there was a word that stuck in my mind, and it may not be part of here, but I need to hear something from you today, and it's about redemption.
What?
In a few words.
Redemption.
Yes. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but I need that today. I'm sorry. I'm very demanding.
No, it's a good point. I had a personal experience with this back near Foundation Day a few years ago. And, when once again we were asked to take new holy wine and make new conditions, and honestly speaking, I really rebelled against it. I thought, again, I don't know about here in Europe, but we probably took holy wine a dozen times or more, often. And I just really didn't feel it at all. And then I had this kind of, not exactly a vision, but a kind of a spiritual encounter with King David.
Wow. Oh.
And you remember King David, right, was really one of the worst sinners in the history of Israel. He was an adulterer. He was a murderer. He sent other women's husbands to be murdered. Actually, he was a bad guy. But there was something in him, in his passion, in his desire, that God felt he could use regardless. But not entirely regardless. Before God could use him again, David needed to go down to the bottom. And you can read about David's agony and his feeling in Psalm 53, calling God, making me a clean heart. Give me a clean start so that I can be your man. And he prayed that prayer, and he shed those tears, and the child that he was praying for died anyway. And in that moment, when God did not answer his prayer, I think that was really the turning point of David's life. Because he didn't give up. He moved on. His advisor said, now why are you stopping fasting? Why are you kind of washing your face and moving on? David said, there's no point. God has chosen not to answer that prayer. So I'm going to look for him to answer the next one. What is really redemption? It is, I think, a new encounter with God. And it's always available. In fact, we need it to happen often. What I came to realize afterwards is successful religions often call people to be redeemed. They often have a time of redemption and fasting, whether it's Ramadan or Yom Kippur or Lent. It's a good thing. But you shouldn't stay there. I think it's a big mistake if we go 360 days of the year feeling unworthy, sinful, unforgiven. In that situation, Satan rejoices. He wants us to feel that way. God wants us to recognize our need for reconnection, and then he wants us to move on and spend the rest of the time feeling, as we are, the victorious sons and daughters of true parents. Competent, capable, able and trusted by God. But before that goes through our head, to realize that there is some need for redemption. Rosemary, you have a question?
No.
Or you're just raising your hand in the spirit? Hallelujah. Okay, yes, and then you.
I would like just to know, what's your plan for second gen? I
Well-
know your passion for second gen.
Yeah. Well, my plan for second gen is I want second gen to be happy. I want them to take my job. In America, we actually made some good progress. Until a month ago, I was president, and I'm happy to report that more than half of my leadership team is second generation.
Yay!
And half of them are women. So, if you look at the memos from Korea, you'll notice that the team I've been assigned is not like that. They're all guys older than me. So I look forward to changing that as soon as possible. I hope to have a chance to meet with all the second generation and to listen and to hear about their ideas, your ideas. Don't see too many of them here because they're out playing sports. But, again, just thinking about the Madison Square Garden experience, most of the good innovative ideas came from the second generation. I think they're already well qualified and able to lead. I've heard that there have been problems in the past. My feeling is our job is to make a movement and a cause that's worth following. And everything else will take care of itself. We will never convince people to take action just because they should, they must. Their parents said so. We didn't do that. We joined this movement because we believed in the direction and the goal. And I think that Mother is longing for us to rekindle that kind of feeling. I mean, she's investing so much, right? 2 weeks ago, I was in Korea at the Global Top Gun. I told them that story of the Dark Star. There are 1,300, 1,400 young people. And when they come back, many of them are back already, I hope it's to a movement, a family that is longing for them to find their place. So I think it's a very, very high priority. And I don't know that I'm good at it, but I do know that we did succeed in the United States in starting to build a really strong young team. I'm a big believer in teamwork. I mean, let's be honest, changing Jack for me, I mean, in America, I realized I was the 14th president, right? Most people can't even remember the names of all of them. One person can do very, very little, honestly speaking. However, a team of people working for a common goal can do a lot. So I would like to see myself as a team leader, got a big team, 70 countries. Some of them have been our enemies and rivals before. That's good. It means that we have an opportunity to kind of really work together. You have a question.
Yes, hi. My big passion is healing, and I'm really passionate about family relations. I think that's the base where our second generation is coming from. And when that's strong in our first generation, then the second generation can be supported. So this is my big passion. And my question is, do you have any maybe experience, or have you been doing something in America, or do you have maybe some plan for your mission right now? Because I feel that there are new opportunities, but not coming from principal background, like emotional healing strategies we can use and we should use. And I'm really passionate about that. What is your experience from your?
Okay, I think I understand your question. In general, in the United States, I mean, it's true that there are many different personal ministries going on. And most of them that succeed, although you may say they don't have a principal background, they succeed because they are based on God's principles. And again, we have to remind ourselves that according, again, the message of the divine principle is that the Messiah comes to unite all of human history, every religion, every philosophy, every teaching. And the key point, in my view, is to keep the vertical line straight. If that's done, all other things are permissible and can prosper. If that wavers and we start to, lose sight of where is the center, then that's very difficult. So, I made my commitment to Mother 5 years ago when she called me out of the relative obscurity of UPF to be president in America. And she said, let me tell you, you only have two jobs. As the elder son nation and the representative of the elder son, but actually all of Western nations are in the same position. Number one is you have to attend your parents. And what does that really mean? It means you have to make your parents' mission a success. She gave me an example. Very often parents in their elder years are stubborn. Maybe there's a family business and it's not going well. And the children can see very well why it's not succeeding. They may even believe it cannot succeed. However, as a filial son, your job is to make it work. You know, not to kind of develop your own glorious career and victory. Before you do that, you have to take care of the parent's dream and vision and make it a reality. And you can see Mother has that view towards the things that Father started and couldn't see completed in his lifetime. She wants to make them work. So I feel our first priority is to understand well the things that True Mother's interested in. Don't have time to go into it today. But very often, every month or so, I write down for myself, what are the priorities that Mother is thinking about right now? And what am I doing to try to advance those things? And the second job is, as the elder, to take care of the younger brothers and sisters. And not to kind of think that any blessings or grace that you have is for you alone. So very simple. And then she asked me, and how's America doing in this respect, you know? And I had to sort of bow my head and say, well, not too well, Mother, you know. In fact, at that time, right after Father Sungwa, America was leading the world and complaining about what had happened, pointing fingers, and really not taking responsibility. And as a practical matter, one thing that I really would like to see happen in Europe, when I took over as American president, we were receiving $40 million a year subsidy from Japan, mostly for the Washington Times, but a few other projects as well. And I didn't really know that. I mean, I lived in America a long time, but it was really confronting to be shown the depth to which families in Japan were sacrificing for America. And you know, our great pride is that within 2.5 years, we'd stopped all that subsidy. And today, we're donating millions of dollars a year to the world. So, actually, Mother wants to invest in Europe. One of the outcomes of my visit was she promised a lot of money to help develop projects throughout this big region. But I promised her, Mother, if you invest that money, we will quickly return it. We will quickly be in a position where we can support and help other nations. But I didn't say no, because I think we need a jump start. And so, you know, with our leadership team, we'll be discussing the best way to use True Mother's investment. I want to hear from you as well. Let me say my email address, michaelbalcomb@gmail.com. It's really complicated. FumikoBalcomb@gmail.com. I would just want to give testimony to Fumiko for a moment. When I became president, the very first thing she did was to set up a weekly prayer with the wives of the other key leaders in America. Just 4 or 5 people. And for 5 years, every week, she's held this prayer call without fail. And I really feel how important that is. From that beginning, you know, many other people offered their prayers and their support. And, you know, I am a believer in prayer. I'm not a great practitioner of prayer. It's not one of my super strengths. But I do see that when prayer is offered regularly, then the power of God comes. So I want to invite you to be part of a real effort of prayer and unity. We're kind of out of time. Joanna had her hand up, so actually Joanna invited me here. I didn't know about this, so I'm going to honor her by giving her the last question.
Thank you, Mike. I always felt you were a really great speaker, and one of the reasons is because you always bring your own personal experiences and testimony into your talks. So what I'd like to hear from you is, in all your time in America, and I don't mean in your time of leadership necessarily, but during that 25 years or so that you've been over there, apart from acquiring an American accent, when you
I have an American accent? In America they say, you've got a terrible British accent.
when you felt those moments where you felt like each one of us has felt the same as Jesus on the cross, why hast thou forsaken me? This kind of spiritual desert that we all go through periodically at different stages of our lives. What is your most memorable experience of how you've come out of that in the United States? Could you give us an example, perhaps, of something that touched your heart that might move us? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Actually, I mean, there's been so many times, of course. And I guess what I came to realize, and again, this is something I want to emphasize to everyone, I hope you really take time to study the books of scripture that True Mother has provided for us, the Champumakyang, the Pyongwakyang, and the Chanseongyang. I mean, I know there's controversy about should you read the King James Version or the Revised Standard. Doesn't matter. But read it, okay? Fumiko and I made a decision to read, not a huge amount. We read 6 pages every day. But if you do that, then over time you kind of plow through these enormous books. And what I came to realize is Father and Mother had these exact same moments as well. There are many times. My favorite passage is in the Champumakyang book. It's only one book, book 1, page 50. And Father says something like this: just because God called me to be the Messiah and chose me did not mean that I would be the one. And of course, that's the divine principle, right? According to the divine principle, there are many things that God needs to do to choose the chosen person. And even then, they need to fulfill their responsibility. So Father explains, I persevered. I made a movie about Father once called The Determined Man. I had this view that of all the characteristics that Father had that made him someone God could use, he was determined not to quit. I see that same spirit in True Mother, and I want to have it myself. That no matter what, I'm determined to see this thing through to the end. And on that foundation, I think God can bring healing and grace. It's 3 minutes to 11. I want to keep my promise. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you a lot more. Thank you.